Well, Lando Norris's second Grand Prix win should really be his third, of course, but we won't go down that path. His second Grand Prix win was an absolute case study on how to do it. Apart from the start, another Lando Norris start where, well, we'll get onto that in a minute. Max Verstappen led the early laps, but before the end of the first phase of the race, there were only two phases. The leaders started on medium tyres and then switched to hards. Before the end of that first phase, Lando had already got past Max, and by the time they got onto the hard tyre, there was absolutely nothing Max could do. Virtually a second a lap. Lando pulled away and eventually set fastest lap of the race when no one was looking. He'd been talking to his team about how quickly it had to go and what the fastest lap was at that point. It was a 13.8 from Lewis Hamilton, and George had done a 13.9, both on new sets of soft tyres. And bearing in mind, Lando was on a used set of hards, a very used set of hards at this point. There was absolutely no way he was getting it fastest lap. But he did on that last lap of the race, with Max Verstappen now 20 odd seconds behind him, the race in the bag, every reason just to cruise it, enjoy the moment. Lando went 0.066 quicker than Lewis Hamilton to get fastest lap and that extra point. One of the points you could say that he's got back now from the situation we had in Hungary. It won't be any consolation, of course, when he looks at the championship points table and thinks about that race. But again, we won't go down that path. We'll just celebrate the quality of Lando's drive. Absolutely superb. It was an easy pass on Max because by then Max was in trouble with grip on the Red Bull, got him under DRS. Easy pass, and then just pulled away. Max was close enough to be in the DRS for 2 laps, and after that it was just goodbye. Max came in first, Lando came in the following lap just to cover him, and that was it. No safety cars, no interventions of any type, and Lando just won the race as he chose. As I say, he did choose to do fastest lap right at the end. So a sensational win for Lando Norris and for McLaren. We saw the signs of that on Friday and Saturday. As I said in those videos at the time, it was going to be very difficult for Red Bull and Max Verstappen to win this Grand Prix. But I did say yesterday that if Max got in front, it might be a different situation. Bear in mind that when you are leading the race, it's easier on tyres. There's nothing touching the tyres, nothing coming towards the tyres. If you're lying P2, tyre deg usually is higher as a result of the debris and a bit of heat and this and that. But Lando just sat there over the first 15 laps, probably annoying for Max at this point because he was leading his Dutch Grand Prix, and by all accounts he should be pulling away if this was the old Red Bull that we've known and loved over the last few years, but not the case. That orange car was just filling his mirrors throughout the lap. That would have been very disconcerting for Max. And after 15 laps, the tyre deg set in on the Red Bull and Lando just breezed past. So it was one in effect because the McLaren was just so good on the way it used its tyres, and the Red Bull eating into its tyres much more, and Max at one point describing the grip, even when he was on the medium tyre, as dumb, D-U-M-B, that he just couldn't feel the grip through the tyres. I put out a tweet back end of last week, just following up on what others have been saying on the internet, but it looked pretty logical to me, and there's really been no... Well, Red Bull have said this wasn't the case at all, as they would, but a lot of engineers have said, yeah, they think this is what has been going on. That up until Miami, after the Chinese Grand Prix, in other words, when the FIA asked them to remove it, Red Bull had been running some sort of inertia generated T-valve into the brake system at the back, allowing the car effectively to have a bit of brake steer going in. And if that is the case, and I'm not sure we'll ever get, well, we probably will get to the bottom of it by the end of the year, but let's assume that was the case, then without that, Red Bull quite clearly would have been making more compromises to get the balance right. And in getting the balance right, it may have compromised the ride height, the grip, and so forth, tyre management. And that's what I think we're seeing. And I think that's why Sergio Perez is in so much trouble as well when that went away. It's not confirmed, but that's what all the indications are, that that's what happened. And McLaren, meanwhile, there's a few people saying they had it as well, but that, again, that's another discussion. But McLaren, meanwhile, just forging ahead now in terms of the way they can use the tyres. Absolutely outstanding. As I say, Lando in the slipstream of Max Verstappen, but still his tyres in much better shape towards the end of the first stint. And on the hard tyre, when they were new, when they were old, when they were in the middle of their phase, the McLaren was just in a class of its own relative to the Red Bull. Just absolutely superb. Lando just laconic and relaxed on the radio, looking wonderful in the car, rhythmic, soft touch, as we've said many times, and around Zandvoort looked absolutely like a guy that should be out there leading the World Championship. Just superb performance from him. Equally a very, very good drive from Max. Talk about damage limitation. No way he was going to win this race if it all went well for Lando in the McLaren. And he still had Oscar Piastri to think about. and we'll get onto that in a minute. But Max did a very good job of controlling second place and finishing second in the race. And obviously from a championship points point of view, that's not bad at all. But this was a real indication that McLaren are right up there, ahead now of Red Bull, and how this will now go into the second half of the year as we go on from Zandvoort will be absolutely fascinating. We've got the Italian Grand Prix a week away now, very, very different sort of circuit. Probably Red Bull might be in better shape there relative to McLaren, but again, very, very difficult now to see how McLaren are going to fall away from any aspect. So excellent performance, very, very good drive too, I thought, from Charles Leclerc into P3 to beat Oscar Piastri. He didn't make the greatest of starts, and this was not a great weekend for Oscar Piastri if he's going to be the new world champion down the road that we talk about, because Lando had him all weekend. And Lando showed how good that car was. And yet, for the back half of the race, Oscar Piastri pushed Charles Leclerc as hard as he could. Ferrari, not as good a car as the McLaren-Mercedes, quite obviously. And yet, no mistakes from Charles. Absolutely impeccable drive. This is the sort of drive that Max used to put in when the Red Bull wasn't in winning shape. And for Charles Leclerc to finish third in that car, I thought was great. And I thought Carlos Sainz drove really well too. He had fastest lap to his credit at one stage of the race when his tyres were quite old, and he finished within 5 seconds of Piastri, and he was pretty much on the Charles Leclerc pace throughout the day. So very good drive by both Ferrari drivers, outperforming the car really in both cases. Sergio Perez finished sixth. Pretty good drive in terms of what we can expect from him in the second Red Bull. His lap times were about the same as Max's throughout the second half of the race on the hard tyre. And Sergio finished ahead of both the two Mercedes drivers, George Russell, who made a second stop to come in for a set of soft tyres towards the end to see if he make a difference. It didn't, and he didn't get fastest lap. And Lewis, who finished within striking distance of George at the end. Good drive by Lewis from where he was. He started on soft tyres. So a really, really good day for Lando Norris and McLaren. The only glitch, as I say, was at the start. And looking at the data now, it's quite interesting to see how Lando's acceleration run went when they're all in first gear. Lando initially was slightly quicker off the line than Max Verstappen, 2 kilometers an hour quicker. And then that dropped down to 1 kilometer. And by the time they were sort of starting to really go there in 20, 30 kilometers an hour, he was falling away -3, -4 kilometers an hour until they got to about 50 kilometers an hour. We're talking about 1 second here. He's 15 kilometers an hour slower than Max Verstappen. So it all happened in that very early phase of the run in first gear. Probably a wheel spin thing. If you look, for example, when Lando was doing 48 kilometers an hour in first gear, he's doing 7,200 revs, whereas Max at the same point was doing 58 kilometers an hour. So that's when he was 10 kilometers an hour quicker already than Lando, and that was where he got in front. He's got fewer revs on the clock, so 6.565. So possibly it was a wheel spin thing there for Lando. Interestingly, also Max then got into second gear slightly sooner than Lando Norris, and at that point he was traveling 16 kilometers an hour quicker. So from Lando's point of view, it was all over then, and that whole phase from first up to second gear happens in 3 seconds. So blink and you miss it, but that's what happened with Lando. But as I say, it didn't really matter, because in a way it was a good thing. Yes, he had the debris, if you like, the turbulence to follow from Max, but he did have the help of DRS, which is always a good thing. And DRS helped him to stay there, and it certainly helped him get alongside Max. And Max sort of just tried to stay alongside him as they went into turn one, but then immediately Lando was gone. We saw some reasonably good overtakes today, but none of it dramatic, and all of it showcased in this sort of stadium race circuit. It's a little bit like Austria, short lap, not a lot of demanding corners. If you got the car working, very difficult for even a middle of the road driver to get it massively wrong. Monza, of course, will be a very different situation, but yeah, bring it on again, because it's going to be McLaren looking really good now on a roll, and be fascinating to see how Red Bull respond now. They've usually been pretty good at Monza when it's been a year when you think, well, maybe they don't have power, maybe they've got a power deficiency, but they always manage to deliver around Monza as a team in terms of setup, in terms of how to read that race. They do very well. So it'll be interesting, but equally McLaren have always been pretty good around there in recent times as well. Ferrari, I think, did a good job of recovering from a difficult Friday and Saturday. Both drivers did an extremely good job today. And if there was a disappointment, I guess it was Oscar Piastri, because the car was that good, and in reality it was good enough probably for him to finish second, but he didn't even get near Max Verstappen, let alone get a pass on Charles Leclerc. So that'll be a race that Oscar won't have enjoyed very much, I don't think, even though it looks quite good on paper for McLaren-Mercedes. Anyway, that's it for the Dutch Grand Prix. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, and to you, the viewer. Thanks for watching. See you next week.